Elias Moran, a weary rancher, is alone at his ranch on a stormy night. But this isn't Elias's story, it is hers. Marybeth Cross stood at her window, watching lightning split the desert sky into raw silver veins. The wind clawed at the shutters, rattling the old house like bones in a coffin. She gripped the shotgun across her lap, the steel cold against her palms, breath sharp in her chest. The storm had come sudden and wild, but she had known storms before, on the land in her heart. Widowhood leaves a silence deeper than thunder. The pounding came again, heavy against the wooden door, so violent that dust sifted down from the rafters. She flinched, the gun barrel rising toward the sound. Who rides in weather like this? She thought, and then the answer came with dread. Men who want something enough to ride through hell to take it. The knock turned to fists, thudding with desperation. Marybeth edged closer, voice tight. Who's there? No answer, only the groan of wind. Her finger brushed the trigger, heart hammering against ribs. The pounding ceased. Then collapse. A body slid down the door, limp, pressing weight into the frame. She opened it an inch, just enough to see the slumped figure before the storm's howl pushed inside. He fell at her feet, a man, soaked in rain and streaked with blood. His face shadowed, but his eyes fever-bright. She dropped to her knees beside him, shotgun still raised in one hand, the other pushing wet hair back from his face. His lips moved, cracked, words ragged as torn cloth. Don't let them find me, Marybeth froze. Every instinct screamed to shove him back into the mud, to bolt the door and pray the storm drowned his trail. But there was something in his voice, a raw truth that echoed her own losses. Against every hard lesson she'd taught herself these past years, she dragged him inside. The fire was low, embers snapping, throwing just enough light to show the ruin of his shirt, the gash across his side. She shoved the shotgun against the wall and fetched a lantern, its glow spilling across his face. He was no boy. He carried years of dust and scars. His jaw was strong but worn, beard patchy, eyes gray as weathered stone. A lawman once, she guessed. Or a killer. She found her sewing kit, fingers trembling as she threaded the needle. He stirred, groaning, eyes flicking open. Name's Jonas Kane, he rasped. His voice cracked but carried a weight that demanded belief. Deputy once, Marybeth didn't answer. She dipped cloth in whiskey and pressed it to his wound. He hissed in pain, head jerking. It hurts. But don't stop. The words struck her. They weren't just about the needle. They sounded like a man carrying a past that cut deeper than any blade. The lantern threw his shadow long across the wall. Outside, thunder rolled heavy, but beneath it, hoofbeats. She froze, needle hovering mid-stitch. The storm covered much, but not the steady drum of riders moving in a circle. Jonas's eyes flicked to hers, sharp despite his weakness. They're here. Marybeth stood, heart pounding, and slid the bolt across the door. Wind rattled the shutters, shadows shifting on the curtains. Hooves scraped gravel, circling slow. A man's voice rose above the storm, cruel and certain. Widow! Hand him over or burn with him. The fire guttered low, smoke curling. Jonas groaned, trying to sit. Blood staining the floorboards dark. Marybeth gripped the shotgun once more, the weight of choice pressing on her chest. Outside, the riders laughed, torchlight glinting through the cracks. The storm was only the beginning. Marybeth's fingers tightened on the shotgun as the storm's fury seemed to bow to a harsher sound, the drawl of authority cutting through rain and wind. Widow Cross, the voice thundered, low and hard, carrying the edge of command she had once trusted. Elias Durn, Sheriff of Hollow Creek. His voice carried no warmth now, only the weight of ownership. Send him out or I'll send fire in. Her chest seized. Years ago, she'd trusted that same voice when he'd sworn to protect the town, to guard the landowners who worked their soil honest. She had believed him once. Believed him when he stood at her husband's grave with his hat low, words dripping with pity. But she had seen the way his eyes shifted, cold, calculating, as though her husband's death was just another line drawn in the sand of his power. He hadn't come to grieve. He'd come to see what could be taken. Marybeth's breath rattled as she stared into the flames of the hearth. She could almost hear her husband's voice, soft, tired, saying, Don't give in, Marybeth. Don't let them take what we bled for. She blinked hard, dragging herself back to the present. She would not answer Elias Durn. Not yet. Jonas stirred against the chair she had propped him in. His face was pale beneath the bruises, his shirt torn open where she had stitched him clumsily. His hand reached weakly for his belt, fumbling until he pulled something from the folds of his coat. A badge. Not gleaming, not polished, but bent and scratched, half its star chipped away. He set it on the table, the metal catching the lantern glow. That voice, Jonas rasped, his eyes narrowing with pain and fury. I know it, Durn, Sheriff Elias Durn. Marybeth turned to him, startled. You know him? More than I care to, Jonas said, his voice low but sharp as a blade. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. He was law once, same badge as mine, but he used it different. He framed me, took money from cattle barons, ran whiskey, blamed it on me when it all went south, left me with a price on my head. Years wandering hunted, all because he needed someone to hang his sins on. Marybeth stared at the broken badge. The storm outside rattled the house again, a reminder that danger wasn't drifting away. Why come here then? Why my door? Jonas's eyes softened with regret. Didn't plan it. They shot me downriver. I rode till my horse fell. Only light I saw was yours. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady drum of rain on the roof. The widow and the exile. Two ruined lives sitting across from each other in a house that smelled of smoke and sorrow. A fresh shout broke the quiet. Durn again. Closer now, his men's laughter carried on the wind. Widow, you have till dawn. Bring him out, or your land will burn with him. The sound of something striking flint sparked through the night. Moments later, faint smoke curled against the window pane. Jonas's jaw tightened. Marybeth closed her eyes, voice barely more than a whisper, but heavy with truth. They won't stop. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the air sharp with the scent of wet ash. Smoke still curled from the barn, its charred frame leaning like a skeleton against the bruised horizon. Marybeth stood on her porch, boots planted on warped planks slick with rain, the rifle tight in her hands. The land around her was blackened in places, scorched where torches had kissed the earth. But the house still stood, and so did she. Through the lifting fog, the riders came. Their silhouettes appeared first, dark against the pale sky, moving with the slow arrogance of men who believed time itself belonged to them. Sheriff Elias Durn rode at their center. His hat was low, his coat dusted with rain, and his eyes glinted with the calm of a man who held power like reins in his fist. He reined in a few yards from her porch, his horse stamping nervously at the smell of char. The other men spread out, forming a crescent around him. Durn's voice carried with sharp clarity. Widow Cross, he said almost gently. You've had the night to think. I'll give you the morning to decide. Hand over the man inside and this land remains yours. Refuse. His eyes slid toward the smoldering barn and a thin smile curved his mouth. And fire will finish what the storm began. Marybeth's heart thudded heavy, but her voice was steady when she answered. This land isn't yours to take, Elias. Behind her, Jonas stirred, leaning against the doorway for support. He was pale, his shirt still stiff with dried blood, but his eyes were sharp enough to see through Durn's honeyed threats. Don't ruin yourself for me, he rasped. One broken man ain't worth your home? Marybeth did not turn to him. Her husband's voice rose in her memory, words spoken on a bed soaked with fever sweat in the final hours. Hold this land, Marybeth, even if it costs you everything. It's ours. It's yours. Promise me you won't let them take it. She had promised. She would not break. Her knuckles whitened on the rifle. You won't have him, she said, the words cutting the morning air clean. For a long moment, silence. Then Elias Durn chuckled, a sound without warmth. He leaned forward in his saddle, eyes narrowing. Stubborn as your husband. That's what got him killed. The words were a knife. Marybeth's jaw tightened, but she did not flinch. She raised the rifle a fraction, steady as stone. Leave this land, Sheriff, before you choke on your own lies. The smile faded from Durn's face, leaving only the cold lines of a man who never lost patience, because he never needed to. He clicked his tongue, turned his horse. Very well. Have it your way. He raised a hand, and the riders wheeled their mounts. As they moved off, he threw one last glance over his shoulder. By sundown, widow, you'll wish you'd listened. She watched them vanish into the morning haze, her chest tight but unbroken. The rifle lowered slightly, but not her guard. Jonas sagged against the doorway, coughing, his voice weak but edged with certainty. You just signed your death warrant. Marybeth finally turned to him, her eyes fierce with a fire that had nothing to do with the ruined barn. No, she said quietly. I just signed his. The sun bled over the ridge, golden light spilling across the hills. Unseen to her, two shadows lingered in that glow. Masked men lying belly down in the grass, rifles braced, eyes fixed on the widow's porch. Their fingers curled around triggers, waiting for the word that would come. The first shot cracked the morning like glass. Marybeth saw the puff of smoke on the ridge before she heard the whine. The bullet sheared a splinter from the porch post by her cheek. She dropped, dragging Jonas with her, both of them hitting the warped planks as dust leapt in little geysers around their boots. Another shot closer. The air tasted of ash and iron. Jonas rolled to his stomach, teeth bared against the pain tearing his side, and snaked the rifle up over the step. He didn't aim long. He didn't need to. His first return shot slapped the hill and a body jerked out of the grass like a puppet cut from its strings. Two of them, he hissed. Left draw. One more on the right. He coughed hard, swallowed it, and worked the bolt. The motion was sure, practiced. Wounded as he was, the gun belonged in his hands the way a prayer belonged on Sunday. Marybeth crawled to the corner where the porch rail met the wall, breath short, vision sharp as a knife's edge. Wood screamed as another round punched through the post and ripped along the clapboard. Showering her hair with splinters, she flinched, forced her cheek to the rough plank, and peered through the gap. A flicker, cloth, movement on the far hill where Juniper crouched low. Her hands shook. Her father had taught her to shoot rabbits clean. Her husband had taught her to keep coyotes off the calves. Neither had prepared her for this. Take the right, Jonas said, voice steady now in that bewildering way men found calm under fire. Breathe. Don't snatch it. Let the sight settle like a leaf on water. She raised the rifle. The world narrowed. The crescent of iron, the smear of a mask, the bob of a hat brim. She exhaled and squeezed. The recoil bruised her shoulder. On the ridge, the figure arched, then rolled, sliding down the slope through brittle grass, rifle tumbling away. Silence rang for a heartbeat, and then the hill sighed with wind again. Marybeth lowered the gun and stared at her hands. They looked like someone else's, stiff, white-knuckled, smudged with smoke. The word broke. I hit him. You killed him, Jonas said, not cruelly, just naming a thing that had already happened. He pushed up with a groan and braced on the porch rail. You crossed the line now. There's no turning back. She felt it like a door slamming shut in a long hallway. The house seemed smaller. The land seemed larger and more hungry. Help me check, she said, the steadiness in her voice surprising them both. They moved fast, hugging the fence line, slipping from trough to trough while hawks turned lazy circles above, as if the sky had seen 100 mornings like this and would see 100 more. The first man lay in a tangle of limbs and sage, mask crooked on a freckled face that could have belonged to any farmhand in town. He couldn't have been more than 20. Marybeth swallowed, pushed his coat aside with 2 fingers, and went through the pockets the way hunger teaches. Quick, efficient, cold, because mercy had no place in the open. Tobacco twist. 2 cartridges. A folded scrap with scrawled directions to the creek crossing. She stepped back. Jonas crouched over the second body farther down the slope, tugged at a leather strap beneath the vest, and let out a humorless breath. Well, hell. He lifted what he'd freed and let it dangle in the light. Not a tin star from a child's toy, not a trinket. A silver badge worn smooth where fingers had rubbed it out of habit. The county seal glinted clean as the day it was issued. Marybeth stared. The storm breeze fluttered the dead man's kerchief, and the hills suddenly seemed to be listening. Law, she said, the word sour in her mouth. Law, Jonas echoed, turning the star in his palm, or what passes for it under Durn. He tucked the badge into his pocket like a curse and looked toward town, where the roofs lay quiet and bright under the new sun. Somewhere below a dog barked. Somewhere beyond a church bell chimed once and fell still. Marybeth felt the line she had crossed burn into her like a brand, and with it came something colder and clearer than fear. He's paying them, she said. Our own. Jonas nodded once, grim. And now we've got proof. Jonas leaned against the wall, face pale, every breath ragged, yet his eyes burned with urgency. We can't stay here. Durn's men will be back, more of them. Better armed. I'll ride out, draw them away. You'll be safe. He pushed himself upright, wincing, hand clutching his stitched side. The desert's wide enough to swallow me whole. They'll follow my trail. Marybeth shook her head, gripping the rifle as if it were a lifeline. This is my land, my home. I won't run and I won't hide. His gaze narrowed, cutting through her resolve. Is it love for this land? Or revenge for your husband? His words landed heavy, slicing past her stubbornness into the wound she carried deep. The porch creaked beneath her boots as silence stretched. Her husband's face flickered in memory. The fever, the whispered promise, the grip of his hand fading but fierce. Hold this land. Even if it cost you everything. Marybeth steadied her breath, her eyes hard as flint. Both, she said, voice low but unshaken. I'll not let them take what's mine, and I won't let Elias Durn's lies stand. Jonas studied her, pain shadowing his features, but something like respect touched his voice. Then you'd best be ready to fight a war. They moved together, though every step cost Jonas blood and strength. Marybeth boarded the windows with planks pulled from the barn's wreck, the hammer's ring echoing across the valley. Jonas showed her how to dig shallow trenches near the fence line, how to angle them for cover. They stacked sacks of grain behind the porch rail, turned barrels on their sides for barricades, filled jars with lamp oil to light if fire pressed too close. Every strike of the hammer, every shovelful of dirt was a vow. She would not yield. As dusk crept across the horizon, Marybeth climbed to the attic for the last of the nails. The air there was dry, thick with dust, and smelled of cedar and old hay. She shifted a crate, searching, and her hand brushed something softer, a leather-bound journal worn at the edges, tucked between rafters. She froze, heart thudding. It was her husband's lantern light spilled across faded pages as she opened it. His handwriting filled the leaves, rows of dates, names, numbers, and notes in his neat, deliberate script. Land deeds, sales, mortgages. But as she turned the pages, the entries soured. Repeated names. Crooked contracts. Signatures written twice. Whole spreads of land changing hands under duress. And there, scrawled in her husband's firm hand, one name again and again. Elias Durn. Marybeth's fingers trembled as she traced the words, bile rising in her throat. This wasn't only about her land. Durn had strangled half the valley, driving families to ruin, turning the law into his weapon. She sank against the beam, clutching the journal tight, her breath a whisper of fury. They won't stop, she said, voice trembling but resolute. Not unless I make them. The lantern flickered, and below Jonas called her name, his voice ragged with warning. Outside, a lone coyote howled, and in the far hills a light glimmered, torches moving once again toward Hollow Creek. The lantern burned low, its glow soft against the log walls, throwing shadows like restless spirits across the room. Jonas sat at the table, the broken badge before him, its edges catching the light in a dull glint. Marybeth laid the leather-bound journal beside it. Her husband's handwriting sprawled across the pages, dates and deeds stacking up like gravestones. The air was heavy with dust and smoke, but heavier still with the weight of what those pages revealed. She leaned over, turning to the passage she had found in the attic. Here, look at this. Every name, every plot of land. She tapped her finger on a row of entries. Families forced to sign away their ranches. Contracts rewritten. Witness signatures forged. All funneling back to Elias Durn. Jonas frowned, rubbing his jaw. He's not just stealing. He's building an empire, using the badge to make his word law, then burying the truth under ink. Marybeth flipped another page, her voice low, almost trembling. My husband wrote this down because he knew. He saw it happening. Maybe he thought he could fight it. Maybe that's why Durn had him killed. The words broke something inside her. She closed the journal with a snap, pressing her palm to the cover as though it could stop the ache in her chest. Jonas reached across the table, his hand rough, scarred from years of hard riding and harder choices. He didn't take hers, not fully, but his fingers brushed against her wrist, grounding her. I was a lawman once, he said quietly. Believed in justice. Believed that if you carried the star, you carried something worth dying for. Then Durn turned it into a lie and branded me the traitor. He gestured to the ruined badge. That's all I've got left to prove I ever was what I claimed. Marybeth's eyes softened as she studied him. The tired lines etched in his face. The weight he bore like an old saddle that could never be set down. She set the journal closer to him, her voice steady now. Then this is more than proof. It's a weapon. Your badge shows who you were. This shows who he is. Their eyes held for a long moment, lantern flame flickering between them. Something unspoken lingered in the silence. Pain recognized, scars mirrored. Jonas shifted, his hand tightening over hers now, firmer, warmer, though still uncertain. His thumb brushed the ridge of her knuckle, and for an instant she let herself lean into the contact. It hurts, she whispered, her breath trembling as much from memory as from the touch. But don't stop. Jonas swallowed, his voice low and rough. I ain't talking about the wound, am I? Her lips quirked in the faintest ghost of a smile, but her eyes stayed wet. Neither am I. The quiet grew thick, filled with the hum of the storm's retreat outside, the creak of the old boards, the soft burn of the lantern. It wasn't the fever of lust that bound them, but something forged harder, tempered in loss. Two souls cut open by betrayal, finding not comfort but recognition in each other's scars. Jonas pulled back slightly, letting her hand go, respect in the restraint. He nodded to the journal. If we're going to bring him down, we need the town to see this. Not just whispers. Not just you and me. Everyone. Marybeth drew a long breath, shoulders squaring as if the decision set itself in her bones. Then we hold until morning, and when the sun rises, we show them all. Jonas gave a grim smile. Then we make ready. This place is a tinderbox and Durn's the spark. As if summoned by the words, a sharp hiss cut through the night air. Marybeth's head snapped toward the window just as the glass lit in a flash of orange. A flaming arrow punched through the roof above, lodging in the rafters. Smoke curled instantly, sparks raining down onto the dry wood of the ceiling. Jonas shoved himself upright, teeth clenched against the pane, and grabbed the rifle. Marybeth kicked the lantern away before its oil could spill, the room plunging half into shadow as fire licked above them. The siege had begun. The flames spread fast across the rafters, licking dry wood with greedy tongues. Smoke thickened in the air, curling down in choking waves, the heat pressing against their skin. Jonas coughed hard, clutching his side, then grabbed Marybeth by the arm and hauled her toward the porch. They burst into the night, where the ranch yard was alive with firelight that did not belong to the house alone. Torches burned in a circle around the property, carried by a dozen men with rifles gleaming, shadows stretching long across the dirt. A voice rose above the din, Elias Durn's, cold and sharp. Bring me Kane and let the widow watch her house burn. Smoke her out if she won't. Gunfire erupted, bullets whining past, chewing splinters from the porch beams. Marybeth dove behind a trough, heart hammering. Jonas dropped beside her, his breath ragged but his hands steady as he chambered around and leaned out to fire. One of Durn's riders spun off his horse, torch tumbling to the ground. Another shot cracked and a rifleman fell screaming into the brush. Jonas's movements were smooth, methodical, every bullet finding its mark despite the blood darkening his shirt. Marybeth lifted her own rifle, the weight of it strange but less frightening than before. Fire roared in her ears louder than the fear. She aimed at a figure creeping low along the fence line. The trigger snapped and the man folded into the dirt. Smoke curled from her barrel. Her chest heaved, but she did not falter. She fired again, covering Jonas's reload. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt not like prey, but like a force standing unbroken against the night. Torches arced through the air, smashing against the barn ruins, into the chicken coop, into the very walls of the house. Sparks scattered, embers glowing like falling stars. The crackle of burning wood rose, mingling with shouted orders and screams. Jonas barked, "Left side!" and Marybeth swung her rifle without thinking. A man in a dust coat had leveled his sights on Jonas. She squeezed the trigger. The shot ripped him backwards. Smoke poured from her rifle, a ribbon of vengeance in the firelight. Jonas gave her a quick nod, grim and approving, before sending another of Durn's men sprawling into the dirt. The heat grew unbearable. Flames clawed higher along the roof, beams sagging, shingles collapsing in fiery sheets. The porch rail burned, sending sparks showering over them. Marybeth's throat burned from the smoke, but still she fought, reloading, firing, ducking, rising again. The air was alive with chaos. The cries of men, the hiss of burning oil, the thunder of gunshots. Then Jonas staggered with a grunt, his rifle slipping from his hand. A bullet had torn into his shoulder, spinning him half around. He fell hard against the trough, blood seeping fresh into his shirt. Marybeth dropped beside him, panic flashing across her face. "Jonas!" He grimaced, teeth clenched. "I'm fine. Keep shooting." But the tremor in his hand said otherwise. The fire roared higher, timbers groaning, the house collapsing inward with a deafening crash. The heat lit the yard like daylight, shadows jerking across the ground. Durn's men closed in, rifles raised, their torches casting the widow's land in hellish glow. Marybeth helped Jonas brace against the trough, pressing her shoulder to his to steady him. Together they raised their rifles again, two figures standing against the inferno, defiance etched in every line of their faces. And then a sound cut through the chaos, Not gunfire, not fire, but voices. Dozens of them. Shouts from beyond the burning circle. Lanterns bobbed in the distance, farmers, ranchers, townsfolk drawn by the smoke and the gunfire, streaming onto the ridge with fear and fury in their eyes. Durn's men faltered, their circle wavering as the first of the witnesses arrived, torches of their own lighting the night. Marybeth's rifle barrel smoked. Jonas slumped beside her, bleeding but unbowed. Around them the ranch burned, but the valley itself had awakened and the sheriff's cruelty no longer lay hidden in the dark. The sun climbed slow over the ridges, pale light washing the valley in gray. Smoke drifted from the ruins of the ranch, curling into the dawn like a funeral hymn. Ash clung to Marybeth's face and dress, streaked with sweat and soot. Jonas leaned against the half-collapsed trough, his arm bound in a bloodied strip of cloth, jaw tight with pain. Around them lay the bodies of Durn's men, their torches guttered out in the dirt. But they were no longer alone. The valley had woken. Farmers, widows, ranch hands, and drifters who had lost homes or kin under Durn's rule gathered in a wide, uneasy circle. Their faces were lit by the new day, eyes hollow with fatigue yet sharp with a shared hunger, for truth, for justice. Murmurs rolled through them like a restless wind. Sheriff Elias Durn sat astride his horse in the clearing, his black coat smeared with dust, hat low over his brow. He still looked every inch the lawman, but the air had shifted. The power in his voice no longer rang unquestioned. He tried anyway. These two, he barked, pointing toward Marybeth and Jonas. Criminals. A widow turned traitor and a disgraced deputy. They've spilled blood, burned their own land. You've seen the proof of their violence. Stand with me and I'll restore order. The crowd shifted, glances exchanged, whispers thickening. Jonas pushed off the trough, his steps unsteady but his voice strong enough to carry. Order? He growled. You call it order when you sell land out from under the families who work it? When you forge contracts, twist the law, and bleed a valley dry so you can own it all? He reached into his coat with his good hand and pulled the broken badge, holding it high. I was a deputy once. I wore this with pride. Durn framed me, branded me a traitor so he could keep building his empire. He killed my name to protect his. A stir rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded. A rancher near the front spat in the dirt. A widow clutched her shawl tighter, whispering that her farm had been taken on the sheriff's word alone. Marybeth stepped forward then, her husband's journal clutched in her hands. The leather was blackened at the edges from smoke, but the words inside lived still. She raised it high, her voice clear and sharp. Here is the proof. My husband recorded every lie, every theft, every name Elias Durn cheated. These pages hold the truth of half the valley's suffering.
He took from me.
He took from all of us. Her words struck like hammer blows. The murmurs grew, louder now, filled with bitterness long buried. Faces hardened. Men who had lost cattle. Women who had lost homes. Families driven into hunger by Durn's edicts. The crowd began to close in, their silence turning into a tide of fury. For the first time, Durn's mask cracked. His hand twitched near his belt, the calm arrogance in his eyes fraying at the edges. You dare, he muttered, his voice rough, stand against the law itself? The law? Marybeth shot back, her eyes burning. You ain't the law. You're the rot beneath it. The crowd roared, their voices rising like a storm. Durn's horse shifted uneasily beneath him. Farmers advanced, fists clenched. The spell of his power had broken, and he saw it. Desperation flickered across his face. Then, with a motion sharp as a whip crack, he drew his pistol, leveling it at Marybeth. The crowd gasped, bodies jerking back. Time seemed to slow. The black iron, the gleam of steel, the widening of his eyes. But Marybeth's hand was already steady on her rifle. She lifted it smooth as a breath, the barrel rising to meet his aim. Ash still clung to her skin. Smoke curled from the ruins behind her. But her eyes did not waver. The standoff was silent but thunderous. The whole valley holding its breath. The square fell into silence so deep it pressed against the ears like a weight. The only sound was the restless snort of Durn's horse and the faint creak of leather, as his hand tightened on the pistol. Dust swirled at their feet, curling in little devils between Marybeth and the man who had poisoned half the valley. She stood steady, rifle raised, her breath slow, her eyes locked on his. Around them the crowd held still as stone, not daring to move, not daring to speak. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to shrink to two figures. The sheriff who had twisted law into a weapon, and the widow who had nothing left to lose but the truth. Durn's smile flickered, brittle, but his hand did not tremble. "Last chance, Marybeth," he said, his voice low. "Step aside." She thought of her husband's dying face, his whisper to hold the land no matter the cost. She thought of the night spent alone, the long silence of grief. She thought of Jonas bleeding behind her, fighting to prove his name had meant something once. Her finger curled tighter on the trigger. "No," she said. The word cut sharper than any bullet. A hawk screeched somewhere overhead, its cry tearing across the valley. And then, the moment broke. 2 shots cracked almost as one. The sheriff's pistol spat smoke, but his body jerked before his bullet could find its mark. Marybeth's round tore into his chest, the force throwing him back in the saddle. His pistol clattered from his hand and his horse reared, panicked, throwing him into the dirt. Durn lay sprawled, the morning sun glinting off the badge pinned crooked on his coat. Blood spread across the dust, dark and final. His hand twitched once, reaching for a weapon no longer there, then fell still. The sheriff of Hollow Creek was dead. For a long second, no one moved. The crowd stared at the fallen lawman, disbelief and relief tangled on their faces. Then a murmur began, growing louder, voices rising like a tide breaking free. "Marybeth, Marybeth." The chant rolled across the square, first hesitant, then strong. The voices of farmers and widows and ranch hands who had lived too long under Durn's boot. Marybeth lowered the rifle slowly, her arms trembling now that it was done. She turned, heart pounding, to where Jonas sagged against the trough. He was pale, lips bloodied, his shoulder soaked through with crimson. She rushed to him, catching him before he fell. His weight slumped heavy in her arms, but his eyes were still alive, gray and sharp if fading fast. He tried to smile, though it broke into a cough. "You gave me back my name," he whispered. His hand, rough and scarred, found hers, clutching weakly. No running now, no shadows, just justice. Her throat tightened, tears threatening through the soot on her cheeks. She pressed her forehead to his, holding him close as the crowd roared her name behind them. But his body grew heavier, his breath thinner. She shook him lightly, voice cracking. "Stay with me, Jonas, don't you leave me now." "Not after this." His eyes fluttered, lips parting as if to answer, but the words caught in his chest. The chant swelled louder, echoing through the valley. "Marybeth, Marybeth." The people hailed her as their deliverer, their widow-turned warrior. But in her arms, Jonas Kane's life hung by a thread, and no chant could hold him back from the dark if it came for him. The weeks that followed were slow and heavy, but they carried with them a kind of healing the valley had not known in years. The ranch lay blackened at first, charred beams jutting like ribs from the earth, the smell of smoke still clinging to the soil. Yet the townsfolk came, men with hammers, women with buckets, children carrying scraps of wood too large for their hands. They had seen what Marybeth had done, and in her fight they had seen their own. Together they set to rebuilding. Walls rose again where ash had fallen. Fences were mended, shingles nailed in rows. The land began to breathe once more. Jonas lived. It was not certain in those first days, when his breath rattled thin and shallow, when fever burned him with cruel persistence. But he held on. A doctor from town dug the bullets free and stitched the torn flesh with steady hands, and Marybeth stayed at his side through every night, whispering to him as though sheer will might tether him to the living. When his eyes finally opened clear and steady, weeks had passed and the ranch stood upright again. He bore the scars on his shoulder across his ribs, but he bore them like a man who had carried worse and survived. Word spread quickly. The broken badge Jonas had kept became his salvation. With Durn's death and the widow's journal, the truth could no longer be buried. The valley knew Jonas Kane not as an outlaw, but as a lawman wronged, a man who had endured exile only to return when the land most needed him. For the first time in years, he could walk the streets of Hollow Creek without lowering his eyes, without a price hanging on his name. Marybeth stood with him at the edge of her land one evening, the horizon painted with a red-gold sunset, fields stretching wide, fences strong again. She breathed deep, the air rich with dust and grass, and felt a weight lift from her chest. She thought of what love had meant when she was young, wild, fevered, desperate to be filled. But the storm had taught her something deeper. Love was not just passion, not just fire. Love was endurance. It was standing when all else fell. It was holding the land when others tried to take it, keeping faith when grief hollowed you out, fighting beside someone not because you were unbroken, but because you were both scarred and still willing to fight. Jonas stepped beside her, his arm still stiff, his movement slow, but his presence steady. He said little, only rested his hand lightly against hers, the touch rough and real. No vows were spoken, no promises made. They did not need them. They had already walked through fire and come out the other side, not saviors, but survivors. Marybeth's gaze lingered on the rebuilt house, the smoke curling gently from its chimney, the valley alive with voices again. She knew storms would come again, fire, loss, betrayal. But she also knew she would endure, and so would the man standing beside her. The widow was no longer alone. Her land was unbroken. Her love had been tested by fire, and it had endured.